U.S. President Donald Trump's overseas envoy will travel to Germany this weekend to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders for the latest round of high-level talks on ending the war. Steve Witkoff, who has been leading White House attempts to mediate between Ukraine and Russia, will discuss the latest version of the proposed peace agreement in Berlin. The Trump administration is pushing for a deal to be in place by Christmas and has held several rounds of talks with Ukrainian and Russian representatives in recent weeks, though there has been little sign a breakthrough is imminent. The Wall Street Journal, which first reported details of the meeting, said UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz would all take part. Confirmation of the Witkoff-Zelensky meeting comes days after Ukraine gave the U.S. its revised version of a 20-point peace plan, the latest iteration of a proposal which first emerged in late November and has triggered a flurry of diplomatic activity. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials said Russia launched a massive series of bombardments in the south overnight. Zelensky said civilian facilities, including energy and industrial infrastructure, had been hit. More than 450 drones and 30 missiles were used in overnight strikes, he added, leaving 2 people injured and thousands without electricity across 7 regions. Russia's defense ministry said it used weapons including Kinzhal hypersonic missiles in the strikes, which are hard to track as they can change direction mid-flight. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, said Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant temporarily lost all off-site power overnight due to widespread military activities affecting the electrical grid, but is now reconnected. The plant is in Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine. It isn't operating, but relies on a constant power supply to cool its reactors. In Russia, Regional Governor Roman Busargin said 2 people were killed in Saratov after a drone strike hit a residential building. The fate of territory in eastern Ukraine remains one of the most intractable topics in the negotiations, with Kyiv refusing to cede land which has been illegally occupied, and Moscow repeating its intention to take the Donbas region in full by force unless Ukraine withdraws. Zelensky has reacted skeptically to the White House's latest proposal on resolving the territorial question, which is for Ukraine's army to pull out of the region and for it to be turned into a special economic zone. The Ukrainian president told reporters that under the U.S. proposed terms, the Kremlin would undertake not to advance into the areas vacated by Ukraine's forces, with the land between Russian-controlled parts of the Donbas and Ukraine's defensive lines effectively turned into a demilitarized zone. The proposal, seemingly an attempt to resolve the legal ownership by creating a new status for the land, has been publicly questioned by Zelensky, who said, "What will restrain Russia from advancing or from infiltrating disguised as civilians?" Ukraine and allies in Europe have said publicly that the U.S.-led talks have been fruitful and have hailed progress on securing amendments to a plan which was widely viewed as favoring Russia when it first emerged. But there have been signs in recent weeks that Trump is losing patience with Zelensky and his backers on the continent. In a scathing interview with Politico earlier this week, the U.S. president labeled European leaders weak and renewed his calls for Ukraine to hold elections. Zelensky said elections could be held within 90 days if the U.S. and Europe provided the necessary security. Elections have been suspended since martial law was declared when Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. As the White House's diplomatic push continues, attention in Europe is focused on how to support Ukraine in the event of a peace deal, with talks ongoing over security guarantees and funding. The Ukrainian government faces a stark financial situation. It needs to find an extra €135.7 billion, £119 billion, $159 billion over the next 2 years. On Friday, European Union governments agreed to indefinitely freeze around €210 billion, £185 billion, $247 billion of Russian assets held in Europe. It's hoped that agreement paves the way for the funds to be loaned back to Ukraine if a deal can be reached at an EU summit next week, providing Kyiv with financial help for its military and efforts to rebuild parts of the country left devastated after nearly 4 years of all-out war. That move has been condemned as theft by the Kremlin, and Russia's central bank has said it will sue Euroclear, a Belgian bank where the vast majority of Russian assets frozen after the invasion are held. Officials were still negotiating the exact structure of a deal to repurpose the Russian assets on behalf of Ukraine, with the Belgian government being particularly skeptical due to its particular legal exposure as the main holder. Elsewhere, it was reported that the latest version of the peace plan being circulated envisions Ukraine rapidly joining the European Union. The Financial Times backed Ukraine's swift accession to the bloc, an idea proposed by Ukraine in the latest draft it has given to Washington. Ukraine formally applied to join the EU days after the 2022 invasion, but despite promises of an accelerated process, is still several years away from becoming a member. Under the plan, Ukraine would become a member as soon as January 2027, AFP reported, citing an unnamed senior official. It was unclear whether Washington had approved that element of the draft. It has not yet been confirmed which European leaders will attend the Berlin talks.